Hey, it's me, Jetski, and today we're talking about Resident Evil Lost Media in celebration of Halloween. Now, before we start though, I will have to ask you to please like and sub, as it really helps out the channel. We're trying to hit 200 subscribers sooner than later. Also, I know I haven't posted in like 2 months, but really I've been caught up with like school and personal stuff. But now that I'm back, let's just hop right into the video. Now, the first piece of Resident Evil Lost Media that I will be talking about is multiple pieces, actually. You see, for Resident Evil 4, they went through pretty much development hell trying to get that game out. It took years upon years of game demos and all kinds of stuff that didn't end up working out. Now, specifically when it comes to RE4, it has had multiple lost demos. The first one kind of got released in some sort of way as it became its whole different game franchise. You might have heard it. It's called Devil May Cry, but there's 3 other demos that have never really been well publicized. The first one was the Blimp demo. It followed Leon trying to track some Umbrella stuff down, and he ended up stuck on a blimp for most of the game. It's pretty interesting. Another demo that really didn't work out was the all too infamous Hookman demo. Now, basically, it was really scary, but Leon would have been like hallucinating the whole time throughout this game, and he'd be running away from hallucinations. One of these hallucinations being a kind of sort of tyrant, you know, like Mr. X or other tyrants from the Resident Evil franchise. However, he would be mostly a hallucination known as the Hookman. Now, he is by far one of the most memorable parts of this piece of Lost Media ever, and it's really fascinating. There's one other demo that's pretty forgettable and, you know, it didn't work out. It's known as the Castle demo. It's just him exploring a castle. There's no big hallucinations or anything. It's still pretty interesting though. None of these demos, by the way, have ever gotten released. The most we know of these demos is just screenshots and overall just like footage from like E3 or Tokyo Game Show or whatever. None of these demos have ever been made playable. There are some fan replications online that you can find, maybe mods or something, but other than that, there's really no way of finding these. That's pretty much all I have to say for this piece of Lost Media, though. Definitely very interesting. On to the next one. The next piece of Resident Evil Lost Media that we are talking about is just as infamous as the last one. Famous zombie director George Romero at one point was signed on to direct a Resident Evil movie. He ended up getting replaced by Paul W.S. Anderson, who is equally a famous director. However, it's pretty much agreed on that he pretty much fumbled the bag with the Resident Evil franchise and pretty much just made it a selling point for other people to cast his wife and things. But it's really interesting that George Romero was signed on at one point. Now, one of these scripts did get leaked, and let me tell you, they're not great. It's so weird. Chris Redfield is, for some reason, just a random Native American guy that is not a police officer at all. In fact, the only one that is really pretty well represented from the games, like at all, is Jill Valentine, because she is a special force member of STARS. However, STARS, for some reason in George Romero's script, has a lot more ties to Umbrella, which is super weird and like inaccurate at all. The whole point of STARS was that they were like an elite force that almost had nothing to do with STARS outside of Wesker. Honestly, this script is not super great. I love George Romero's movies and all, but like this just feels so off and feels like it doesn't understand what really makes Resident Evil in the first place. But the second script that he wrote was supposedly a lot better reinterpretation of the video games. However, this script has never been seen. It's never been leaked, it's never been shown off, and we know little to nothing about it. However, apparently it still was enough to keep Capcom fascinated with George Romero's concept of a Resident Evil movie, so they ended up just booting him off and replacing him with Paul W.S. Anderson, which was somehow a much worse decision. However, that's pretty much all I have to say for this piece of Lost Media. It's definitely very interesting to talk about. However, that's pretty much all I have to say on it. On to the next one. Now, the next piece of Lost Media that relates to Resident Evil is a super infamous one that has actually been found and somewhat released, I guess, to an extent, that being the original version of Resident Evil 2. Now, this has an incredibly complex backstory, and a lot of people have done a much better job than I probably ever could, to be honest, talking about this. But it's really interesting, and since we're talking about Lost Media, I feel like I owe it to myself and you guys at home just to at least mention or slightly talk about it just a little bit, you know? So, Resident Evil 2, if you didn't know, went through a lot of development hell. Like, not as bad as Resident Evil 4, like it didn't go through like 4 different scrapped versions of the game, but there were a lot of different versions of this game at some point that I feel like need to be talked about. So, the original version of this game was radically different. Almost none of the characters had any relation to the original game, and there was no Claire Redfield. Instead, there was this character named Elza Walker, which was an interesting character, and interesting in a different way. I guess she had some relation to, like, a random STARS member that got killed off screen in the first game. This is interesting and all, and I like how they slightly tied it, but without really making it a direct sequel to the first game. However, I feel like what we ended up with was just so much better than what they were going to originally give us. Leon as a character too was radically different as well. I feel like I should mention this. Instead of just being a rookie like day one, runs into zombies, no, instead he was like a very experienced officer who had never seen anything like this. He was a Debbie Downer pretty much the whole time, and you know, he was a lot more of a miserable character, and I'm glad they changed this to the all too iconic Leon that we ended up getting throughout the rest of the Resident Evil franchise. I feel like this version of Leon wouldn't have worked as well. We did get a lot of the same stuff though, like the whole Birkin arc and stuff is about the same, you know, his wife and Sherry Birkin and stuff would have still been in the game. However, a lot more characters would have been a lot different. In fact, Chief Irons, you know, like one of the main villains in Resident Evil 2, was actually supposed to be a good guy. I know that's kind of crazy to think about, but yeah, this game went through so many alterations, and in the end, I think it's pretty safe to say that what we ended up with was a lot better than what we would have gotten from this original version, and I do understand why they cut a lot of it, but it's still interesting to look at nevertheless. That's pretty much all I have to say for this piece of Lost Media. On to the next one. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I have saved the best piece of Resident Evil Lost Media for last. Now, this is known as Resident Evil 6.5, or the original version of Resident Evil 7. That wasn't known to exist until this year, aka 2023. Now, this game wasn't actually known to exist until infamous Resident Evil leaker Dusk Golem had revealed screenshots of the original demo of this game. Now, this is really interesting. It seems to be a lot like Resident Evil 4, to be honest. In fact, the main characters of the game would have been Sherry Birkin and Leon S. Kennedy, again, despite being pretty much main characters in the last game in the franchise at this point. It seems to be a lot like Resident Evil 6, however, you know, because that game was very bad and nobody liked it, they decided to scrap this version in 2013. Now, this game and its demo have not ever been seen. Outside of these two images that have been leaked, there is no references of it, there's just nothing anywhere. Nobody can find anything of it. Okay, so supposedly this game was supposed to take place in some sort of fake European city, which is really interesting. The players were also meant to encounter water-based enemies and use water-based weapons, which is also another interesting thing about this game. There was a big emphasis on environmental fighting and stuff, which is a really interesting concept that really has never been explored in a Resident Evil game ever, to be honest. However, you know, because Resident Evil 6 was just so bad and no one liked it, they decided to scrap this game and release the now famous version of Resident Evil 7 that we all know. And it's really interesting to see how much this game changed just from one way to another. And I do think we ended up with a much more superior Resident Evil 7. That one's just incredibly scary. If you never played it, I'd recommend trying it out just to, you know, scare yourself, since it is like Halloween or whatever. It's really interesting, though, to see how much this game changed. That's pretty much all I have to say for this piece of Lost Media, though. Definitely interesting. If it ever gets an update or something, maybe I'll do a Lost Media update video in general someday, and I'll definitely talk about this if it ever gets an update. That's pretty much all I have to say, though, for this piece of Lost Media. On to the conclusion. In conclusion, Resident Evil as a franchise has lots of really interesting pieces of Lost Media and really interesting things overall. I did think that almost all of these do deserve to be seen by the consumers who really waited all this time for a lot of these things and didn't always get what they were promised. You know, with Resident Evil 4, the Hookman has never been seen outside of that one demo, and really there's just like nothing at all. And a lot of these fan interpretations that have tried to come out usually got shut down by Capcom and haven't really been seen themselves either. I feel like we as the consumers deserve to at least see some of these products that we could have possibly gotten. Maybe we'll appreciate the final product a lot more, or maybe we'll wish we got what they originally planned instead of what they actually delivered on. That's pretty much all I have to say for this video. If you guys liked, please like and sub, as it really helps to the channel. It was me, Jetski, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.